Hello everybody, welcome back to History of Briggs. My name is Briggs, and today we'll be talking about the Roman colonization of Britain, Part 4. Emperor Constantius returned to Britain in 306 despite his poor health with an army aiming to invade northern Britain. And the provisional defenses having been rebuilt in the preceding years, little is known of his campaigns. With little archaeological evidence, but fragmentary historical sources suggest he reached the far northern Britain and won a major battle in early summer before returning south. His son, Constantine, who would later become Constantine the Great, spent a year in northern Britain at his father's side, campaigning against the Picts beyond Hadrian's Wall in the summer and autumn. Constantius died in Eboracum, which is now York, in July 306 AD, with his son at his side. Constantine then successfully used Britain as the starting point of his march to the imperial throne. Unlike the earlier usurper Albinus in the middle of the century, the province was loyal for a few years to the usurper Magnentius, who succeeded Constans following the latter's death. After the defeat and death of Magnentius in the Battle of Mons Seleucus in 353, Constantius dispatched his chief imperial notary, Paulus Cantenna, to Britain to hunt down Magnentius's supporters. The investigation deteriorated into an all-out witch hunt, which forced the vicarius, Flavius Martinus, to intervene. When Paulus retaliated by accusing Martinus of treason, the vicarius attacked Paulus with a sword with the aim of assassinating him, but in the end he committed suicide. And as the 4th century progressed, there were increasing attacks from the Saxons in the east and the Scotti in the west. A series of forts had been built starting around 280 AD, which I have mentioned in my last video about this, and to defend the coast, but these preparations were not enough. When, in 367, a general assault of Saxons, Picts, Scotti, and Anticotti, combined with apparent dissension in the garrison on Hadrian's Wall, left Roman Britain prostrate. The invaders overwhelmed the entire western and northern regions of Britannia, and the cities were sacked. This crisis, sometimes called the Barbarian Conspiracy or the Great Conspiracy, was settled by Theodosius the Elder from 368 with a string of military and civil reforms. Theodosius crossed from Bononia, which is now Boulogne-sur-Mer, in France, and marched on Londinium, where he began to deal with the invaders and made his base. An amnesty was promised to deserters, which enabled Theodosius to re-garrison abandoned forts by the end of the year. By the end of the year, Hadrian's Wall was retaken and order returned. Considerable reorganization was undertaken in Britain, including the creation of a new province named Valentia, probably to better address the state of the far north, which was in between both Antonine's Wall and Hadrian's Wall, and a new Dux Britanniarum was appointed, Dulcitius with Civilis to head a new civilian administration. Another imperial usurper, Maximus, raised the standard of revolt at Saguntium, which is now Caernarfon in northern Wales, in 383, and crossed the English Channel, where he then killed Roman Emperor Gratian, where he ruled over Gaul and Britain as co-emperor under Theodosius III, who was the last emperor to rule over the whole of the Roman Empire, both east and west. And Maximus fought a successful campaign against the Picts and Scots around 384. His continental exploits required troops from Britain, and he took all the troops in Britain. And it appears that forts in Chester and elsewhere were abandoned in this period, triggering raids and settlement in northern Wales by the Gaels in Ireland, and his rule ended in 388 after he tried to overthrow Emperor Theodosius and failed. And then he was executed by Emperor Theodosius, and then Theodosius ruled over Britain until 392 AD, when not all the British troops returned from those campaigns, and the empire's military resources were stretched to the limit along the Rhine and Danube rivers. And around 396, there was more barbarian excursions into Britain, and Stilicho led a punitive expedition. It seems peace was restored by 399, and it is likely that no further garrison was ordered. And by 401, more troops were withdrawn to assist in the war against Alaric, when the usurper Eugenius made a bid for imperial power in the Western Roman Empire, until 394, when he was defeated and killed by Theodosius. And when Theodosius died in 395, his 10-year-old son, Honorius, succeeded him as Western Roman Emperor. And the real power behind the throne, however, was Stilicho, the son-in-law of Theodosius's brother, and the father-in-law of Honorius. And Britain was suffering raids by the Scots, Saxons, and Picts, and sometime between 396 and 398, Stilicho allegedly ordered a campaign against the Picts, likely a naval campaign intended to end their seaborne raids on the east coast of Britain. And he may have ordered campaigns against the Scotti and Saxons at the same time, but either way, this would be the last Roman campaign in Britain of which there is any record of. And in 401 or 402, Stilicho faced wars with the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, and needing military manpower, he stripped Hadrian's Wall of troops for the final time. In the year 402 is the last day of any Roman coinage found in large numbers in Britain, suggesting either that Stilicho also stripped the remaining troops of Britain as a whole, or that the empire could no longer afford to pay the troops who were still there. Meanwhile, the Picts, Saxons, and Scotti continued their raids, and on December 31st, 1405 or 1406, the Alans, Suebi, and Vandals crossed the Rhine River, possibly frozen at that point, and devastated eastern Gaul. and the Romans had little to no effective response, and the people of Britain, fearing that the Germanics would cross the Channel into Britain, they rebelled against Honorius's authority. Their intent was to choose a commander who would lead them in securing their future. But their first two choices, Marcus and Gratian, did not meet their expectations, and were killed. Their third choice was a soldier named Constantine III. In 407, Constantine took charge of the remaining troops in Britain and led them across the Channel into Gaul, rallied support there, and attempted to set himself up as Western Roman Emperor. Honorius's loyalist forces south of the Alps were preoccupied with fending off the Visigoths and were unable to put down the rebellion swiftly, giving Constantine the opportunity to extend his new empire to include Hispania. And in 409, Constantine's control of his empire fell apart. Part of his military forces were in Hispania, making them unavailable for action in Gaul. And Honorius took control of Britain, but shortly after he led troops out of Britain to help against the attacks by King Alaric, who in 410 sacked Rome. And also in 410, after the troops left Britain, the Romano-Britons sent a plea for help, but Honorius denied and said to look for their own defenses, and Roman Britain was over. And we also have to take into perspective that, sure, maybe the Roman direct rule over was done, and that the Roman military was out of Britain, and it eventually, every year, lost more and more contact with Britain. And this is generally accepted as the date it fell, but yet again, at the same time, after Rome, the Romano-Britons formed, which were the Romans' successor in Britain, who carried out Roman customs and basically occupied Roman settlements. Although the Scots and the Saxons and Gales pushed all throughout, invading Britain, they were able to remain, although little is known about this period in time. In fact, it is one of the least recorded times in history, and so we couldn't say truly, but there were people who were supporters of Rome and Roman culture, and so, in a sense, this was the end of Roman Britain, but it also wasn't. Either which way, Britain fell into Dark Ages, and Rome continued to decline until the Western Roman Empire was finally defeated and de-established in 480. Well, thanks for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe, and share this with a friend. If they won't listen, share with an enemy. And with that being said, Spriggs out.